Right, Karen, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to your story, at least hearing about it and sharing with the listeners, and also exploring a different aspect of therapy that we haven't really covered here on the podcast. And I've experienced it to a certain extent, very limited, but I do want to understand some of your own knowledge and work that goes into it. But what we're really talking about is art in general and how that can help people get out of their head in a sense and release because we tend to live in our head so much. So, but before we explore all of that, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, what's brought you here, who you are, and then I'm sure we'll dive right into it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to talk to you and your audience. I have a passionate interest in this topic because I've seen it operate so well in my own life and family and my students as an artist, as an art teacher,
Mhm.
coach, filmmaker, actor, all the arts and all their various modes of operating. And I've discovered some fabulous ways that art is self therapy, that you
Mhm.
can receive wellness through creativity. And I've made that my passion project to share with as many people as I can because it's so available. And so that's why I'm here to talk to you about that.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate that. Help us understand a little bit about your journey in the world of art, what got you in, and what was some of the work you did in this space?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm the daughter of an Irish storyteller. He was actually on vaudeville, even though he was a career Marine. He had that creative side. He was funny and very articulate and quite theatrical. And being in theater was my life's dream. But I found that to not be as challenging, believe it or not, as art. So I pursued both. I went to a college where I could do theater and art and loved it. And then found that my teachers didn't love my painting as much as I loved to do it. Matter of fact, they used four-letter words to describe my paintings. And quite frankly, I was devastated. I went to
Mhm.
four different painting teachers, and they all said the same thing, that I couldn't paint, that I was a three-dimensional
Mhm.
artist. So I switched to ceramics and sculpture from graduate school, and I still love that. But there was always a desire in me to paint, and I had that voice inside
Mhm.
believing what those professors said: you can't do it, you're not good enough, you never will be. But I kept trying, I kept painting, and I couldn't finish them. I ended up with these stacks of unfinished paintings. I like to do portraits and portraits of
Mhm.
landscapes, and it just wasn't what they were looking for when I was in school. But I
Mhm.
happened across a mentor who had been to the Chicago Art Institute when they taught the foundations. And he actually gave me the skills, helped me develop the skills I needed to do the type of painting that I wanted to do. I ended up
Mhm.
not just a better painter, but a better teacher, because I understood
Mhm.
that what my students really needed was the foundations to be able to then do whatever form of art they wanted. Also, as an actor, I ended up in film school to tell stories and love the collaborative nature of filmmaking. I get to teach a group of rescued Ugandan youths via
Mhm.
the internet. Now we connect around the world. These are rescuees with incredible stories to tell. We just had a premiere of our second film last Friday, and it's just fun to see them interpret what I learned as a Western filmmaker into their
Mhm.
very African story style. And that's just so joyful to see what they can do out of starting out their lives more difficult than hardly any of us can relate to.
Mhm.
And to see them having lives of creativity and purpose and getting
Mhm.
healing from it. And I guess that's what really sent me down this journey of artist self therapy, is seeing it do things I didn't understand, like having
Mhm.
a young man come who was dyslexic and had ADHD, was failing in his academics, and his mom brought him to my studio for classes. He started thriving. He took to drawing and painting and sculpture like a duck to water. And I started entering their work in art competitions for youth, and he was winning ribbons. And it
Mhm.
gave him the confidence that he needed to start dealing with his mental disabilities, to be able to graduate from high school and have the kind of confidence and humor that he'd always been lacking. And it was a miracle. But then he
Mhm.
had tragedy strike him at only 18 years old. He got a brain infection that led to a stroke, and he suddenly
Mm.
became paralyzed on the right side of his body. You can imagine how devastated. He ended up getting his skull removed and replaced with plastic to save his life. And they did. They saved his life 4 months in the hospital. He left there. He couldn't talk. They were trying to keep his hand from curling up, his right hand, and he was dragging the right side of his body with a walker. But his mama
Mm.
brought him right back to my studio.
Mhm.
I said, "I'm not really a trained therapist, but come on, you've got your left hand. Let's see what you can do." And I didn't understand at that time what was going on because we have this fabulous right brain that is full of
Mhm.
creativity, but we go to school and we learn all these left brain skills of order and organization and timeliness and logical
Mhm.
thinking and getting all the specifics. But most of us haven't really had that right brain developed, but David did. Had been building these connections, these neural connections. So he started learning to draw left-handed so well that his neurosurgeon called me. He said, "I've never called anybody's art teacher before, but what are
Mhm.
you doing?" Because he's not only stronger with his weak hand than I am, and I'm a surgeon, but he's getting healing on the right side of his body. I was like,
Mm.
"What?" And now, if you were to see that young man, you would have no idea that he had a plastic skull, that he hadn't been able to talk or walk. He's still a little bit slower, but what I understand is building our right side gives plasticity to our brain. And so, if we have dysfunction or injury to part of our brain, another part can start compensating for that. And
Mm.
that's what was happening with him. And he has his sense of humor, he's not depressed, and he lives a really wonderful life. I can't take credit for all of that, but I'm telling you, I know that I know. And his neurosurgeon and his family agree art had a huge place in restoring him
Mm.
physically, emotionally, and mentally.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
go
yeah,
ahead.
that's a wonderful story, and I do wanna come back to that, but I am curious about your personal journey because you mentioned you weren't really encouraged with paintings. The teachers were often giving you negative feedback and not really being constructive in that sense. So, what allowed you to stick with it? Because I do see a parallel between what you've shared and your student David here. What motivated you to stick with it and keep coming back despite all the even the shame around it?
Yeah. And there's that right brain bully that tries to tell you all the time you're not good enough. And
Mhm.
I had been humbled enough to not let perfectionism get in my way because this guy that
Mm.
was teaching me, he actually gave up painting because he wasn't as good as the masters. I saw that and I thought, what a shame, because what we
Mhm.
have to bring to the table is our own personal creative gifts. And so I knew that I could bring myself to the table in a way that could be successful even if I wasn't the world's best painter. I could get joy and satisfaction out of it, and I wanted to be able to finish a painting. And this was huge for me emotionally. And I also realized when I say it made me a better teacher in one way, one besides having the skills to teach my students, I also knew that I had to create a safe space even before I understood any of the mental things that were going on, that the right brain is sensitive, it's intuitive, it's easy to be damaged. And most of us have some kind of wounding from our childhood.
Mhm.
Somebody that told you you can't draw, you can't sing, you can't dance. They were either from peers or they were from parents or maybe a teacher. Somebody in our lives said something along these lines and we believed it. We took it to heart and it brought a wound because of that right brain sensitivity. It's damaged, but I'm telling you,
Mhm.
you can overcome it. And that these are what I love to see happen is people blossom in their creativity because we have this right side of our brain. Everyone is creative, not just
Mhm.
those who identify as artists or as
Right.
musicians or singers, but everybody. All right, here's a
Mhm.
great example. I started studying all this. I'm not a scientist, okay? So take this with a grain of salt, but I read this.
Yeah.
They studied people singing in the shower. Okay, a lot of us would never sing with a microphone in our hands, but we can belt it in the shower, right? So they studied them. All right, there you are, resting your left brain. You're not trying to figure out any problems or solving anything. You're just scrub a dub dubbing, singing along your favorite songs. You get out, you're feeling good. You've released serotonin, the happiness chemical. You're
Hmm.
warm and fuzzy, and an idea comes to you. And this is the cool part. Your brain was connecting left brain, right brain, neural pathways that haven't been there before. So maybe something that's been niggling in your life, a problem to solve or a relationship issue, and an idea comes like that. And you weren't
Hmm.
working to figure it out. It happened because you're engaging left brain, right brain. I'm
Hmm.
like, wow, this is cool.
Yeah.
Everybody can sing in the shower, in the car, while you're driving along. There's so many ways. I started saying, how can people be creative if they don't identify as an artist? And I have a whole list. I have this pop up podcast I'd love for your viewers to go and engage in. It's 3 episodes of more about creativity and how you can engage in
Right.
so many different ways. Go to www.getcreativewithkaren.com. I would love for you to see and find a way to bring it into your life. They say it only takes 20 minutes a day. And it's stuff that you're already taking a shower, so add singing to it, or you're
Mhm.
on their way to commute, sing along. It's
Mhm.
good for your brain, good for your
Yeah.
emotions, good for your
Yeah.
soul.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the parallels I would draw to what you're sharing here in terms of engaging the right brain or the right side of the brain, and even the example you gave of singing in the shower and how a lot of the times you do get answers or you're able to solve a problem. The parallel here is even with journaling, I see this quite a bit, especially in the therapeutic side. If you ask people to journal, could be 5, 10, or even 20 minutes a day, you're able to come to a lot of conclusions and solve a lot of the problems or even question the validity of some of the thoughts you have. And I think part of it is just from engaging that right brain. And there's something to be said about writing things down on paper. And I know it's not necessarily the same as art, but it is engaging that part of the brain. So I just
Absolutely.
wanted to mention that too.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. There's so many ways to do it that aren't just painting and drawing or the visual arts.
Mhm.
There's so many ways to do it, and that is one, journaling. I know for some of us that are very distractible, that's the way I was able to focus in church or anytime I'm sitting, I write notes. I take notes of everything, and I'm not even understanding. I'm engaging left brain, right brain when I do that.
Mhm.
And you are when you're journaling, you're writing your thoughts down, you're bringing those intuitive places without any editing. And that's one of the keys and why I say, let's create a safe space, no criticism zone. This is not, we're not going to engage the left brain as much as we are the right brain. And in order for it to feel safe and secure, it can't be under a critical attitude. Or some people are in the habit of being self critical. Or even more so than critical of others. My students have problems with their own criticism. And I've seen teenagers literally paralyzed. I call it paralysis of perfectionism, maybe just that
Mhm.
sense of deep failure that we can talk ourselves out of this beautiful creative side of our brain being free to be itself.
Mhm.
We have so much to offer in our individuality. If we've got 10 different fingerprints out of anybody else on the planet, there is something so unique about who we are in our soul. And those who've
Mhm.
suffered either deep trauma that has caused
Mhm.
emotional or mental issues, or if you were born with some mental challenges or emotional challenges, there is so much proof that engaging in some type of creative activity every day brings healing and restoration, and it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody has to see it. You can also create a legacy. My beautiful little old grandmother from Norway, 96 years old, she would always be knitting us booties. Now these booties were of the most wild colors, and as kids we're like, okay, booties from our grandma. But I'm telling you, since she passed, those booties are so valuable to the family. You couldn't buy my booties from me. We've knit the holes on the bottoms because she made them with her own hands.
Mhm.
And if you love to bake or cook, what a legacy that is. We have her
Mhm.
recipes, and they're still precious, even taking them to the next generations. These are ways to be creative. Gardening, taking a stroll. This is how simple it is to be creative.
Mhm.
And I'm not talking about getting on your Fitbit watch and counting your steps and being aerobic, which is great. I'm talking
Mhm.
about a stroll. maybe with your pet or with the loved one or a friend, and just strolling. Notice the sky, notice the leaves in the trees, notice the birds tweeting, notice the sounds of the neighbors, whatever's going on, or the ocean if you happen to live close to the sea. It's good for your soul. It's not just good for
Mhm.
your body, it's good for your soul. It refreshes
Yeah.
you. It gets those parts of your brain working together that can bring healing, restoration, and
Mhm.
new ideas and solving problems. It's great if
Yeah.
you're an employer, if you are a leader of a group. Doing some kind of creative activity is huge for creating unity, helping people work together, for problem solving, and having fun. That's the other thing. The
Yeah.
arts and music and these things are fun. I just got a
Mhm.
friend of mine who talked me into taking a line dancing class. We started last week. I'm 70 years old and I haven't done anything like this in a very long time. And it's a blast. You should see a room full of ladies, all different sizes and ages. And we're just doing it all at the same time. It's hilarious, but it's good for you in so many ways.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And coming back again to your personal story, there's something I came across in Rick Rubin's book, and I thought it was pretty fascinating. It might be fairly obvious, but when you think about artists, and he's worked with a lot of musicians, and when they're creating art, a lot of the times it's an expression of your inner wisdom or whatever you're experiencing internally. But the second these artists start focusing on how their art's going to be received by the public, that's when the creativity is gone.
Yeah.
It's only when you're able to focus on just putting it out there without any attachment to the outcome or any form of validation or how it's going to be received, you can truly create art. And that's where a lot of them succeed, but then they get really tied up with that success. And he talks about a lot of these one hit wonders because then they got so focused on how their art was going to be received and how they can perform to that same level. And then unfortunately, that doesn't happen
Mm.
and they just go away. But in your story, too, I think once you realize that these paintings are not for the teachers or how they're going to receive it, it's really in a form of inner expression. I think that was something that really helped you navigate that situation.
Absolutely, and then getting the skills I needed to do it. My sons are musicians, and my oldest got called into a band in Germany, and they said, "You're an acoustic guitar player and a singer-songwriter, but really need an electric guitar player." So he spent 8 hours a day and sometimes night, depending on his schedule, really honing the skills that he needed to be an electric guitar player instead of an acoustic guitar player. Those are the things that we do when we're driven to be really good at what we love to do. And the truth is we get joy out of it when it turns out good. And yet we're always I call myself a practicing artist. We're practicing artists. We're always practicing. I watch videos of other artists all the time. I have 3 degrees in the arts and I constantly feel like I can get better. And yet the process, and that's exactly what you're describing. The process
Mm.
of it gives me joy. Painting gives me joy. The funny thing, my mother, of course, gave us crayons and paper when we were little. I was the oldest. But quite frankly, the paper just wasn't big enough. So next thing I'm big trouble because I've been drawing coloring on the walls. Okay, big trouble. But my mom couldn't know that someday people were going to pay me to paint on their walls. I love big. I love mural work. I love doing large canvases and large paintings. And when I got to the point where I was able to figure out how to get better as an artist, that's what I was able to do, is to do
Mm.
faux finishes and murals on in homes and restaurants and all kinds of locations, and had a large part of my career doing paintings on walls.
Mhm.
And that's something that comes forth. Yeah, I didn't know. I've always journaled because it seemed to help me focus. I didn't know I was going to end up writing books and publishing books. And I have a couple more in the works because I learned, and you were describing not being aware of the criticism when you're trying to be creative. That's so important. I don't even let
Mhm.
my students look at their paper when we're drawing.
Mm.
And when you're using your left brain just by using utensil, but by not engaging in that critical thing that wants to come on us, not looking at the paper, that it being about eye-hand coordination, it being about focusing on what you're drawing and the live and live before you, and then seeing what happens. Laughing if you want to laugh, but then let's try it again. And guess what? You keep getting better and better every time you do it. Same thing if you are going to sing, or you are going to play music, or you're going to knit something, or whatever it is, or maybe you're trying new recipes or gardening. These are all ways that you can engage that left brain and right brain, creating more brilliance, getting healing emotionally, getting healing in your brain, even. And it works. And scientists can't really tell you why it works, they just tell you that it does work. So
Hmm.
it's worth thinking about. And here's what I want to challenge you with your viewers: what did you love to do when you were 5 or 6? Now, that's another thing the scientists agree on. 95% of 5 and 6-year olds are creative geniuses,
Mm.
but only 2% of adults.
Mm.
So, what's happened is exactly what you're describing. In those years, as you've been developing all the skills of the left brain, which are handy and wonderful and great, the right brain's been trivialized. It maybe has been wounded, as we've described
Mhm.
already, or in
Mhm.
some way you haven't had the freedom or the education or the training or the mentoring to develop the right brain. And consequently, you're not able to really be in your full brain capacity that is
Mhm.
there available for everybody. So I ask people, what did you love to do then? Because it's a real clue to what you can still engage in. And it's never too late. You're never too old to learn and to engage in something that brings you such joy and fulfillment in your
Mhm.
life.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and what I'm hearing from you is that we do get conditioned, and then we lose that level of curiosity and creativity. And as children, our imaginations are wild, and that's where a lot of that creativity comes in. Now, the other piece, what I find fascinating, is what you're sharing with students in terms of not looking at their drawings. And one of the things I saw in art therapy was exactly that. When I attended as a volunteer, I was told, close your eyes and just draw whatever, and then try to, after the fact, try to understand what's going on. And by just closing my eyes, I shut out all that criticism and the outside noise and the conditioning that I'm used to. Whereas if I would kept my eyes open and I was sketching things out, I would have let all those external factors come into play, that judgment and shame or whatever
Yeah.
we experience, and it would have influenced what I would have done.
Yeah. It's
So I
just
do appreciate that. Yeah.
yeah, that's absolutely good. And it's just like if you're learning an instrument, everybody, whether you're 5, 15, 55, 95, learning how to play the piano, everybody starts in the same place. You got to figure
Mhm.
out what notes you go with which fingers, and then you're translating from the notes on a page, and you're translating those notes on a page which finger. So it doesn't matter how old you are, you're going to start with the same building blocks of being able to do it. And it's the same thing with the arts or music or singing or dancing. We all start in the same place. It's an even board. But when you come into it with woundedness, somebody has, you can't sing. So what's going to happen when somebody asks you to sing something? There's a breakdown emotionally, mentally. And even if you have a wonderful voice in that moment, nothing but a squeak comes out. And those are that left brain, right brain competing with each other. And I call it left brain bully because it's remembering words and things that have
Mhm.
hurt us. But you
Yeah.
can overcome that. And that's what I'm trying to encourage people. Think about what would bring you joy because we have the
Mhm.
internet now. We can find classes all over the place. I'm an online teacher now. I can be found. And
Mhm.
that's fun for me to see students of all ages, all capacities getting to explore their own personal way of expression. There's a deep
Mhm.
joy. Now, here's one study I read about. Walter Reed Hospital is the premier military hospital probably in the world, and they did a study recently over the summer because their soldiers were coming back. They were wounded. They've dealt with their physical infirmities. They've been dealing with them emotionally, mentally, but they were just not thriving. So they tried this one summer program. At the end of it, it was a huge success. And they asked the soldiers, what was your favorite part? The overwhelming majority said art. And again, these are people identifying as soldiers, not
Yeah.
artists, and yet they found this joy in being free, as you're describing, closing your eyes and just letting yourself. There's something called Neurodoodles, and it's an actual course where you just let your hand move freely, just as you when you're journaling. You're just free thinking. You're not thinking anybody else is going to read this journal but me. This is my thoughts, my
Yeah.
feelings, writing down. Same thing when you just let your wrist and your hand go, and then they just
Hmm.
soften all the edges to make them very organic and flowy. I went to we have a gallery walk in our city once a month where the galleries stay open late. You get to meet the artist. Almost every gallery had at least one artist doing neurodoodles. I'd never seen so much of this actually in galleries before. So it's a real thing. My
Hmm.
92-year-old mother was coloring with her granddaughters recently. And she said, Karen, I've heard you talking about this, but you're so right. I can't
Hmm.
believe I always thought of coloring as just for children. She said, but I was so relaxed. I felt really peaceful and it made me feel good just to color with my grandchildren. And she had been given some adult coloring books. She said, oh, they're too fussy. Oh, no. She liked the children's coloring books that gave her more freedom to flow. And I'm thinking, it's never too late. I'm telling you, find some way to explore that beautiful right brain creativity that is in all of us, and you'll be amazed. That releases serotonin. It also lowers those stress hormones, the
Hmm.
cortisol. Cortisol is a good thing, but it's if too much of it, we all know, are not good for us. And it's a great
Right.
outlet for releasing that stress. Even taking that stroll in the night
Hmm.
might be just what you need, not another jog or something that's still good for you, but not a stroll. Just enjoy
Yeah.
and be in the moment. There's something that happens in our brain and our emotions when we're capturing that moment, living in that moment, enjoying this moment. And there's
Hmm.
just a multitude of ways to do it.
Yeah, I agree very much. Now, another thing I'm curious about is where did that transition, and I know you shared it in terms of just a background and your father, but where did that transition to film happen, and why do you think it happened?
Yeah, we had my husband and I were ministers, and we have a home group. We had a bunch of young people, college age students that were storytellers. Some of them were majoring in script writing, and they challenged me that my being an actor and being in theater and really loving, like I said, this community way of creation. You may not be
Hmm.
somebody that just wants to sit in your studio all by yourself and draw and paint, or it's just not appealing to you, but you'd love to be part of a class or a group. That's the way filmmaking and even theater feels to me. I was a gymnast in high school. I played soccer in college. I loved it. There's other people on the field with you. You're feeding the ball to them. You're working together toward a goal. So filmmaking appealed to me for that whole, gosh, no matter what you're good at, you're going to find a place to fit into making movies. It's a huge
Hmm.
deal. And I love the whole storytelling format and being able to, I'm a visual person. So being able to bring that story to life and solving relationships. And I think we all identify with the visual arts in some way. We get touched by it. I've gotten to teach in college, teach students of all ages in college. And it wasn't long. I'm in South Carolina, and the city I was teaching in is fairly rural. And my students, quite frankly, most of them hadn't had much art, and they're not pursuing art careers, but they had to take a humanities class. And our art history and appreciation textbooks tend to be written by art historians who love art,
Hmm.
but they're not really coming from the right brain, right? Me as an artist, I wanted my students to feel the stories of these paintings and these artists. So I had a publisher come to me. I hadn't thought about it, but in 2020, I ended up writing a 630-page book with 1,800 images that the publishers got to buy. And I found artists locally that I knew my students would be able to relate to, that tell the stories of our culture in incredibly beautiful, meaningful ways, that they would find somebody in there that they could relate to their story, their images, their content, the colors, however, be touched by the art in a way that they could take with them whatever career they were choosing. We have an
Hmm.
incredible rich history here in the Western world of incredible variety of art. And that's been so gratifying to see them just for that brief amount of time I get them to inspire them. Of course, I make them draw too. I make them do some art, not looking at their paper and getting over that thing that says, I can't draw, I can't, da, 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 da. Getting just understanding this can take you a long way in your life to understand. Get out of
Mhm.
that left brain bully, shut it down. Create your own safe space that lets you try new
Mhm.
things, whatever it is in your life. Shut it down
Mhm.
and give yourself the grace to try something new. And
Mhm.
it's not too late, and you're not too old, you're not too young. Do it.
Yeah. And see what comes out of it, right? That takes us back to your student that you mentioned who went through some severe surgeries and changes, but managed to stick with it. And it made a huge difference for his life and probably even saved his life. What do you think was what was he looking for? Like, why do you think he came back? And you mentioned his mom brought him back, but there's obviously something that
Mhm.
he wanted and
Yeah,
he kept pursuing it and
yeah.
stuck with it until he obviously benefited from it. But what do you think it was?
He had come the first time depressed and really
Mm,
convinced he was never going to be able to graduate from high school, let
mm,
alone this grade. And seeing how getting good at something with his hands gave him confidence to overcome. His mama was brilliant at coming up with things that she was studying on how to help him with his ADHD and his dyslexia. So he was able to take that success and move in with confidence enough to persevere through the other challenges. And
mhm,
he graduated from high school. And before he did, I entered his work into that youth art competition one last time. And he didn't just win first place, he won best in show. So when he had this accident, this infection 2 months later that set him on this life changing journey of paralysis, he had that in him. He had that
mm,
success underneath his belt. He had inside of him, he knew that he could do art. And
mhm,
I think that kind of encouragement enabled him to agree with his mom, come back, what can you do? None of us understood, except maybe his neurosurgeon, what it could be doing in his brain at the same time. And I love
right,
that. I love that there's the science to back what I've experienced as in my own life and in the lives of different students. Now, here's another
mhm,
story. This is she was one of the moms I often made my moms not make them, but I had them take the classes with their students. Discovered a lot of talent. And this particular woman loved sculptures, loved working with clay in her hands. Was really good at it. And she came to me and said, "I've just been diagnosed with late stage breast cancer and given 6 months to live."
mm,
Of course, we were just reeling from that. I said, "Look, in 9 months, I've got a big show I'm working on." It was a huge room installation called Taste and See Sweet Shop. I was going to turn this room using porcelain to make cakes, cupcakes, candies, truffles, all the trays and everything. Why don't you come help me? Come to the studio when you're not doing mastectomy and reconstruction and chemo. Come to the studio and work with me. And she did, and we had a blast, even though she said, "I may not even be here in 9 months, Karen." I'm like, you know what? You'll have a legacy to leave with your
yeah,
family. Yeah, she was there in 9 months. That show was a huge success. 17 days in a huge art festival in Charleston, South Carolina. She was there. She went into remission and eventually became completely cancer free. And she's still
mm,
cancer free. Now, she's convinced that art saved her life. Yes, she did do the
mm,
medical stuff, but there's a lot of people that do the medical stuff, but she had something positive to think about, something to distract her from this terrible trauma in her life, from all the treatments, which are horrible to go through
mhm,
themselves. And we laughed. We had so much fun. Okay, what colored how do you make dark chocolate versus milk chocolate, just inventing our way through this project, and ended up with a show. We got to show it again in another competition the next year, and she's been able to have a full life. And yeah, just
mhm,
like David's neurosurgeon, she's convinced that art saved her life. And you may
mhm,
know somebody in your life dealing with some physical traumas, mental traumas, emotional traumas. And I'm telling you, this is a real real benefit for anybody, whatever you're going through. We were made for
Mhm.
it. Half our brain was made to be
Yeah.
creative. So it's in you, it's there. And you can remember back to when you were a child. What did you love? Did you like spinning? When you liked leaping? Did you like the outdoors? What did you love to do that can still be in your life to bring you joy, um, and healing? Do it.
Yeah, for sure. And what I'm hearing, at least from David's story, is he had already built that resilience early on, which carried him through some of the other stuff. And that also can be very beneficial, right? So finding that outlet and knowing you can use some of these things to really help you. Now,
Mhm.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm also working with an older gentleman who was an engineer, very strong, intelligent, left brain person, but he loved the arts and he had been taking classes in painting and drawing. And so when he retired from his career, he started painting and getting so much joy out of it, and his family did. But then a couple of years ago, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and his right hand was shaking so much he completely stopped painting and drawing. His family didn't even realize how depressed he was until
Hmm.
his son met me, and he said, I got to introduce you to my dad. And we met where he's in Connecticut, I'm in South Carolina. We got on Zoom, and I told him David's story, paralyzed on the right side, that he
Hmm.
learned to paint. Again, I'm not an art therapist, I'm an artist and an art teacher.
Hmm.
And he said, okay, let me try it. And just like we were describing, teaching him to draw left handed, not looking at the paper. If you've tried drawing, even with your strong hand, not looking at your paper, it's going to look iffy, especially at first. So you already are realizing your weak hand is probably not any worse at this than your strong hand is. And in a very short amount of time, he was seeing enough success to get encouraged to start drawing and painting again. He even sometimes, when I would change the exercise, use his right hand and even forget that he hadn't been drawing and painting right handed. So he started marking on the drawings left hand or right hand because it seemed like it was really. And now I've read some studies how we don't understand how creativity, how using both sides of the brain helps people with these kind of diagnoses to
Hmm.
reduce the symptoms. I don't know if it's going to cure his Parkinson's, but I know that it's giving him a better quality of life right now, today, to have a
Hmm.
life that he can find still joy in. He had a
Hmm.
friend of his call his son and say, I don't know what this art teacher person is doing, but I'm seeing a difference in Doug's life. I'm encouraged by that. And I know there are people really trained for this that are art
Hmm.
therapists and music therapists. We know music touches our soul in ways that bypasses our intelligence, bypasses whatever might try to stop it, and go into the deep places in our soul and our hearts and can bring healing.
Hmm.
And we're designed that way to
Hmm.
have healing, because this life is hard. Everybody has things they're dealing with, even if you may not deal with it yourself. Maybe somebody you love or you're connected with is dealing with it. And these are
Right.
important things to realize because it's fun to do as a family or together. All of my kids were studio babies. And none of them ended up being artists, but I have musicians and writers, and they're all actors. Everybody in my family is an actor because when you're a filmmaker, you need people for everything all the time. Everybody's.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because I think there is something fundamental you're talking about, whether it's art or even music. It draws people, brings people together, and it's so powerful. And I don't think we fully appreciate the power it has. So I do appreciate you sharing that. Now, we're in an interesting time in our existence, and you're seeing a lot of shift to digital art, and people are using artificial intelligence to design art. And personally, I feel like there's a huge shift happening with respect to it. What are your thoughts around that? Where do you think we're headed with respect to that?
Well, I'm 70 years old, and I appreciate all the advances. Trust me, I've just enjoyed it. I love Chat GPT. I'm in marketing with my online business. I've had to learn all this later in life, but I love that I can write emails. And sometimes I have a class and I ask Chat GPT to help me word it. And I've gotten some great titles and things from Chat GPT. I've looked at the websites that Leonardo and some of the art programs, and they can make perfect compositions. And I teach composition. I teach rule of thirds. I teach, this is part of what I teach my students, is what makes a painting good, what makes it bad, those kind of things. And when you look at them and you see that perfection, you can almost always tell it's lacking something. It may be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but it's missing that humanity. It's missing I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like AI is ever going to replace humanity because they
Mm-hmm.
don't have that human
Mm-hmm.
touch.
Right.
And we embrace it, we utilize it any way we can, that it helps our lives and improves things, makes things easier for us, use it. But I know this trend towards young people being raised on their phones or being raised playing video games.
Right.
What did people do before they had electronics, before we had TV, before we had any of this? They sang together. Somebody
Mm-hmm.
pulled out the banjo, somebody pulled, maybe had a keyboard or whatever they had to play music, and everybody sang. Whether you can sing or not, you did things together. And
Mm-hmm.
it I think that we're going to have at some point a way to swing back to that, where it's not so driven by one-on-one activity. Even
Mm-hmm.
if you're online streaming or strolling through Facebook or strolling through your Twitter or whatever, you're going to at some point need to have some human touch, some live
Yeah.
human touch. And so we
Mm-hmm.
take the good and try to not get overwhelmed by the bad. But I'm not worried about the arts
Mm-hmm.
ever being replaced by AI because they can't replace
Yeah.
humans. They can help a
Yeah. No,
lot.
I agree. I agree. I think my concern really is with people not using traditional forms of means to create art, but then going to the the digital and artificial intelligence to create art. So it's not that it would replace it, but it's just people will shift towards it. So it'll be interesting to see, but I do agree with you. It's not going to replace it. So definitely. But Karen, I really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate everything you've shared and some of the stories you've shared with us in terms of the power of art and how it's helped a lot of people that you've come across and in terms of their healing and even from a therapeutic standpoint. But you also mentioned your website and you mentioned how people can go check out some of those videos you were referring to. So if listeners wanted to get a hold of you or your work, what are some ways they can do that?
Yeah, I would love for people to register for that three-part pop-up podcast. It's www.getcreativewithkaren.com and listen to those. I actually give assignments because I am a teacher. I give homework to try these different ways to be creative, see how it makes you feel. And then in each one is my contact information to get in touch with me. I have a website, karendeloachart.com. I'm doing a free webinars and there's ways to participate with me as I encourage that creative gift to be stirred up in each one.
We'll put that all in the show notes so the listeners can find it. But thank you again for coming on and having this conversation with me today
My pleasure. Blessings to you and yours.
as well.